I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a flashlight. But what I found beneath the basement stairs would destroy what little faith I had left in my family. The leaves outside rustled against the windows, whispering the same unease I felt when I stepped into my childhood home. I hadn't planned to stay long, just a quick visit after the holidays, a few hours of polite smiles, maybe a casserole, and a strained game of catch-up before I disappeared again into the life I'd built on my own. But Evelyn had asked me, no, commanded me to help with reorganizing the basement. We need to make space for storage, she'd said, her tone syrupy but firm. You know how chaotic things get around this time. I said yes because I always did. That's what daughters like me did. Charles sat in his usual armchair upstairs, sipping the same lukewarm brand of respectability he'd been clinging to since retiring from city office. Brandon hadn't even bothered to come downstairs to greet me. Typical. Still nursing a hangover, probably from whatever self-destructive gala he'd attended the night before. The basement light flickered overhead as I descended. Cold air met me like a warning. The smell, musty wood, and something else was sharp and unpleasant. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and made my way toward the cluttered shelf beside the fuse box. The flashlight wasn't where it used to be. I crouched to check behind a stack of dusty bins, fingers brushing cobwebs and cardboard. Then my hand knocked into something metallic and hollow. A storage box. Nothing unusual until I opened it. It wasn't the contents that stunned me first. It was how neatly they were arranged. Ziploc bags, vacuum-sealed, labeled in black marker with numbers and short codes. Tucked beneath them were party-sized rolls of cash and disposable phones. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and nausea. I had no medical background, but even I knew what this was. The powder, the vials, the packaging. This wasn't casual. This wasn't accidental. This was a system. A footstep behind me made me turn sharply. Brandon stood at the edge of the stairs, his silhouette framed by the weak yellow bulb above. He looked down at me. Eyes narrowed, face unreadable. He didn't flinch, didn't act surprised. Just still. I stood box still, open beside me. Is this yours? He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened and I saw the twitch in his temple, the kind that came before a lie. Why are you down here? I was looking for a flashlight. I keep my things down here. Things like this? His gaze darkened. You shouldn't be snooping. I wasn't. My voice was steadier than I expected. But I found it. And I'm not blind, Brandon. His nostrils flared. You don't get to lecture me. I took out my phone slowly. No sudden moves. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face calm. I snapped 2 photos, one wide, one close. The click of the shutter sounded louder than it should have. You're making a mistake, he said, stepping closer. No, Brandon. You are. And you've been making it for years. He stopped inches from me. You think anyone's going to believe you? Dad won't. Mom sure as hell won't. I smiled faintly. I don't need them to. There was silence then, thick and electric. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Maybe he didn't. I stepped away from the box, walking calmly toward the stairs. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I didn't show it. Not to him. As I reached the bottom step, I hesitated. My fingers gripped the railing, and I turned slightly, not enough to see him fully, just enough to register the weight of what was behind me. I looked up at the shadows above. Then I heard it, his voice low and nearly drowned in the dark. You'd better forget what you saw. Blood may be thicker than water, but addiction runs deeper than both. I didn't sleep that night. Brandon's voice kept looping in my head like a curse. You'd better forget what you saw. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which he said them, like he'd rehearsed that threat his whole life, waiting for the moment I'd finally step out of line. By morning, my decision had crystallized like frost on the inside of my window. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and something sour. Brandon stood barefoot in front of the counter, scrolling his phone with one hand and spooning cereal with the other, as if we hadn't stood facing off in the dark just hours ago. "I need to talk to you," I said. He didn't even glance up. "About what?" "You know what?" I replied sharply. "I took photos. You have until today to tell Mom and Dad. Otherwise, I go to the police." The spoon paused midair. He looked at me like I was a fly buzzing in his ear. "You're serious?" I took out my phone. One swipe and the image filled the screen. The box, the bags, the labels. I held it where he could see. His face shifted. For once, he didn't have a comeback ready. "You'd ruin this family over some powder," he muttered. "You already did that." I said low and even. "I'm just done covering for you." His laugh was dry and bitter. "So now you're a hero, no? But I'm not the scapegoat anymore." His face twisted. "You were never the scapegoat. You were just irrelevant." I flinched. Not because it wasn't true, because it was. And we both knew it. Footsteps approached from the hallway. I straightened as Charles and Evelyn entered, dressed in their robes, blinking at the light and tension. "What's going on?" Charles asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "I found drugs in the basement," I said before Brandon could speak. "Brandon's been hiding them. A lot of them." Evelyn went still. Charles looked at Brandon, then me, as if unsure whom to believe. Brandon scoffed. "She's overreacting." "I have proof," I said, lifting my phone. "Pictures. I can show you." Evelyn stepped forward quickly. "Rachel, sweetheart, why don't we all just calm down?" "I am calm," I said louder than I intended. "But I won't stay quiet." Charles frowned. "Let's not make this a scene. We don't know the full story." "Yes, you do," I snapped. "You've always known. You just look the other way." The silence that followed confirmed more than any denial could have. Evelyn reached out like she was going to touch my arm, then stopped. "Brandon is taking over your father's connections. His future, our family's name, depends on that." "And what about me?" I asked. What was I ever worth to this family? Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. I remembered being 10, crying over a shattered vase that Brandon had broken. I had taken the blame. Mom had made me apologize. Brandon had watched with popcorn in his hand. "You never wanted the spotlight," she said finally, like that excused everything. I stepped back. "No, I just wanted to matter." "You still do," Charles said awkwardly. "But this isn't the way." I turned to Brandon. "You're going to admit what you've done." His smile returned slow and venomous. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? I'd like justice." He leaned forward, voice low. "You think the police will care? You think they won't dig into you too?" I stiffened. "There's nothing to dig. People see what they're told to see," he said. "And no one sees you." It hit harder than I expected. I looked at my parents. My mother's forced calm, my father's passive retreat, and realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was truly alone in that house. I stepped away, heart pounding, every bone in my body screaming to run, but I didn't. I walked. Just before I reached the stairs, I felt him watching me. His voice followed, soaked in quiet venom. "You try anything, and you'll regret it." I wanted to believe I was still safe in my childhood home. That illusion shattered faster than my bones. I moved through the house like a stranger trespassing on sacred ground. The walls were too quiet, as if they were holding their breath. I had packed a small overnight bag, just enough to get me out, just enough to make a point. My phone, clutched in my hand like a lifeline, held the one thing Brandon feared: proof. That photo, snapped in haste in the basement, felt heavier than the bag on my shoulder. I crept past the kitchen. The light was off, but I could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the antique clock above the sink. Time moved, indifferent. I was almost to the front door when I heard it, the creak of the floorboard near the staircase. I turned. Brandon. His eyes were bloodshot. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "You're not going anywhere." I said nothing. I just gripped the doorknob a little tighter. "You think you're saving me?" His voice was quiet, deadly. "You think one picture makes you some kind of hero? It's not about being a hero." I said, voice low but firm. "It's about not letting you ruin yourself and drag us all with you." He stepped closer. I saw the flicker of desperation behind the rage. "Delete it." "No." He lunged. We struggled. I wasn't strong enough to stop him, but I was stubborn enough to fight back. His hand clamped over mine, trying to wrench the phone away. We twisted, tangled in the dark, a grotesque dance of betrayal and fear. "I'm your brother," he screamed. "Family doesn't do this." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you." The rest of the sentence vanished as his hand shoved me hard. It happened in seconds. My heel caught the edge of the rug. My body twisted mid-fall. And then impact. My hip hit the floor first, followed by a sharp crack that made my vision flare white. The cold tile pressed against my cheek. My phone skidded across the room just out of reach. I couldn't move. A surge of pain gripped me, pulling the breath from my lungs. My fingers scrabbled weakly against the floor, trying to get traction. Nothing. My legs wouldn't respond. I heard him breathing heavily above me, then retreating steps. A door closed. Silence swallowed the house. I don't know how long I lay there, seconds, minutes. The pain blurred everything, even the passage of time. My mouth opened, but I couldn't scream. All I could do was breathe shallow and panicked and pray someone would notice. And then footsteps. Soft, measured. I looked up through the haze. My vision blurred, but I saw my mother standing in the hallway. She didn't rush toward me. She turned away. Sometimes the silence after pain screams louder than the pain itself. The first thing I felt was the cold. Not the chill of fall air, but the sterile, numbing kind that clings to hospital sheets. Then came the ache, deep pulsing, anchored in my pelvis like someone had poured cement into my bones. My eyes fluttered open, greeted by the harsh white of overhead lights. The beeping of a heart monitor marked time in slow, unbearable ticks. I couldn't move. Not because I didn't want to, because I physically couldn't. Every muscle screamed rebellion. My body, bruised and broken, lay trapped under layers of blankets and betrayal. Footsteps approached, sharp, deliberate. Charles entered first. Not Dad. Charles. He wore his best concerned parent face, the one he used during photo ops at charity events. His tie was still straight, his shoes polished. "Rachel," he began, voice low. "We need to be smart about this." Evelyn followed, arms crossed, lips tight. She didn't come to my side, didn't brush my hair from my forehead. She simply stood there like a PR agent prepping a client for a press conference. "This could ruin your brother's future," she said. "And ours." I blinked at her confusion, slowly giving way to rage. "Brandon." He. My throat clenched around the words. The memory of tile, of impact, of his face twisted in something animal. Charles interrupted. "You know what the press would do with this. Think about the optics, Rachel. He's already been nominated to assist Councilman Reyes. If this comes out—" "I was nearly crippled," I whispered. Charles flinched. Evelyn didn't. "That's not the point," she said. "You've always been dramatic. It was an accident. He was upset. And you were provoking him." Tears prickled my eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Provoking. Like being assaulted was a response I'd earned. Brandon didn't even have the decency to come inside. I caught the silhouette of his frame outside the door, his hoodie pulled over his head, eyes darting away when he noticed me looking. Coward. "Listen," Charles continued, lowering his voice. "You're part of this family. That comes with responsibility. If this leaks, it won't just hurt Brandon. It will tarnish everything I've built, everything you benefit from." I laughed. "Bitter? Broken? Benefit? You mean silence?" Evelyn leaned in, then her voice a hiss. Keep pushing and you'll find yourself out of the will. Out of this family. You've always wanted to be independent. Maybe it's time we grant you that. Their footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut behind them. I was left alone with the machines and my own disbelief. How had we gotten here? When had loyalty turned into a muzzle? Then the door creaked again. But this time, it wasn't Charles or Evelyn. It was Dr. Elise Harper. Her face lined with decades of compassion and quiet observation was taut. She approached my bedside slowly, her clipboard held tightly against her chest. She checked the IV, adjusted the monitor, said nothing. "Are you going to tell me it was an accident too?" I asked. She paused, her hand resting on my arm. "They told me not to ask questions. Said it was a slip. That you tripped." I turned away. "Figures. But I've known you since you were 6, she said softly. "And I've seen the bruises before. Not physical, but emotional. The way you'd go quiet when they praised Brandon. The way you smiled through being ignored." I said nothing. My throat closed up. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she whispered. "Not to me." My eyes filled again, but I refused to let them fall. Not this time. She glanced at the door, then back at me. Her voice dropped to a murmur. "I won't let this go." When I didn't respond, she leaned in closer, brushing my hair back like Evelyn never did. Her lips barely moved, but I heard her soft, resolute, and furious. "They will not silence me." When I drifted into sleep from the pain meds, I heard her whisper, "They will not silence me." Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it walks in with a stethoscope and a broken heart. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, but even daylight couldn't warm the antiseptic chill that clung to my room. Fog still pressed against the windows outside, smearing the edges of buildings and trees like someone had dragged a wet brush across a canvas. I blinked, groggy from the meds, but alert enough to recognize the silence that had replaced yesterday's tension. No footsteps, no hushed threats. Just the soft hum of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Dr. Harper sat in the chair beside my bed. She wasn't scribbling on a chart or adjusting my IV. She just sat there, silent, present. There was a strength in that stillness I hadn't noticed before, like she was guarding me in a battlefield no one else could see. She didn't speak right away, and neither did I. Our silence felt heavy, but not awkward. It was a quiet pact between survivors. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I sent the report." My heart skipped. "To the police," she added, "with your injuries, and a full account of your admission notes." I included what I saw, what I suspect. I blinked at her, uncertain if I was still dreaming. "I used my name," she continued. "No anonymous tip, no backdoor whisper, just the truth. Signed by me." The words didn't land all at once. It was like trying to catch raindrops with numb fingers, real but too much too fast. No one had ever stood beside me like that. Not without a price. Not without a hidden motive. My throat tightened. I wanted to thank her, to reach for her hand, but the only thing I could do was whisper, why she turned to me, then her eyes clearer than I'd ever seen. "Because I didn't years ago." A pause. "You were 8. You had a hairline fracture in your arm. Brandon said it was a rough game of tag. You said you fell. But the bruises told a different story. I should have asked more. I should have pushed." She looked down, folding her hands in her lap. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it would only cause trouble. But I was wrong. There was something raw in her voice, like an old wound reopened. "I remember," I whispered. "You gave me a sticker. A dolphin." Her lips curled faintly. "You wouldn't smile, but you didn't cry either." I remember thinking this girl's already learned how to hold it in. Tears welled up before I could stop them. Not from pain, not even from sadness, from release. from the unbearable weight that started to lift ounce by ounce, simply because someone chose to believe me. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said, "but I'm not walking away again. Not this time." I turned my face toward the window. The fog was beginning to lift. A nurse walked in quietly, checked the drip, gave a warm smile, then left without a word. Even that small kindness felt monumental. Then, just as the silence returned, a voice drifted in from the hallway, familiar, firm, and edged with steel. "Don't be afraid, Rachel. It's our turn now." I turned my head sharply, wincing at the movement, and there she was. Dressed in a dark coat, hair in a tight bun, eyes like sharpened glass. Aunt Clara, the woman my parents called a troublemaker. The sister Evelyn never mentioned unless she was angry, but to me in that moment she looked like a soldier arriving on the battlefield. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the tile. I didn't know what her plan was, or how she even knew I was here. But something about the way she stood, the way Dr. Harper looked at her without surprise, told me this wasn't spontaneous. This had been building. And now it was beginning. The truth is, like fire. Once it sparks, it spreads quietly, then all at once. The fog had finally lifted outside my hospital window, but inside my chest, a different kind of storm was forming, quiet and methodical. The ache in my pelvis had dulled to a throb manageable with pills. What lingered sharper than any physical pain was the memory of my mother's voice, calm as glass, threatening everything I was still barely holding on to. Dr. Harper had found me a private room at the end of the hallway. No flowers, no cards. Just a laptop she brought in that morning, sitting open on a wheeled tray across my lap. On the screen, an encrypted email client, a scanner app, and a blank Word document titled, "For Maria. Confidential." Clara sat in the armchair by the window, flipping through a leather-bound notebook with pages that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Her fingers paused now and then, eyes narrowing at lines scribbled in hurried cursive. "I started writing this after Thanksgiving 2011, she murmured. That night, Brandon showed up to dinner high. "You remember," I nodded slowly. He knocked over the wine glass, blamed it on the dog. And Evelyn laughed like it was charming. Clara added, her voice sharpening. "I didn't." She tore out a page and handed it to me. On it were timestamps, short entries shouting in garage, "Brandon plus Charles suspected argument over money. Evelyn hid bruises on forearm after visit from Brandon." I stared at the ink like it might burn through my hands. Dr. Harper stepped in with 2 cups of coffee, setting one near Clara. I pulled his patient file from his last ER visit. "You won't believe how many narcotic prescriptions he's filled using other people's names." She handed me a thin folder. Inside was a scanned medication log name, listed Elaine Travis RN. But Elaine had retired 2 years ago. "That's not just theft," Clara said. "That's felony drug fraud." I opened the email draft again and began uploading images from my phone, the hidden stash photo, the prescription scan, the page from Clara's journal. Each click was like flipping a domino forward. But I hesitated. "What happens if they trace this back to you?" I asked Dr. Harper. She shrugged. "Let them. I'd rather lose my license than my integrity." That's when I added the final name to the recipient list, Maria Jensen. She wasn't just an old caseworker. She was the only adult I remembered treating me like more than an afterthought. When I was 15 and Brandon had accidentally crashed my bike, Maria had shown up to interview me at school. She'd seen something no one else cared to name. "I trust her," I said aloud. "But I want to keep this underground, quiet." Clara nodded. "Expose them slowly, starve them of their control." I clicked send. And for the first time since I fell down those stairs, no, since I was pushed, I felt like I had stepped onto solid ground. Hours passed. I scanned more files. Clara handed over more entries. Harper stepped out to field questions from hospital administrators. The sun dipped low, orange light streaking through the curtains. It was almost midnight when the screen lit up again. Unknown caller. Video chat. My fingers hovered, then tapped. Accept. Brandon's face appeared half-lit in the bluish glow of his car dashboard. His pupils were wide, his mouth twisted in a smile too sharp to be human. "You think I don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "You're not clever. You're weak. You always have been." He leaned closer. "I know exactly what you're doing, Rachel. And I'm telling you, stop. Now. Or I will." You don't need a sword to wound someone powerful, just the right whisper in the right ear. The Office of Child Protective Services in our county was a bland box of beige walls and recycled air, but Maria Jensen's desk was different, neat, but alive. Sticky notes in soft pastels marked legal codes and quotes from forgotten philosophers. A photo of her late husband sat beside a mug that read, "Don't mistake quiet for weak." She looked at me across her desk and asked again, "Are you sure you want to escalate?" I didn't blink. "I'm already bruised. What more can they do?" She nodded and double-clicked the folder on her desktop titled Harper Docs. Inside were files already encrypted and duplicated, including Clara's journals, scanned prescriptions, and, most importantly, a clip. 37 seconds of audio from the hallway outside my hospital room. Brandon's voice low and full of venom. "If she talks, we all go down. Make her understand." It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. Maria uploaded it to a secure government server labeled Priority Internal Investigation. No press, no subpoenas. Just the whisper of official eyes beginning to turn in our direction. As we waited, Clara handed me her phone. "I rewrote your statement into something clean, anonymous, but sharp." I read the article, "Prominent family shielding known addict from legal consequences, sources say." It didn't name names. But it didn't have to. Anyone who had grown up in our town would recognize the outline. I forwarded it to the editor of the Borough Weekly, a paper so small it ran local squirrel sightings. But it had one thing no major outlet did, no sponsors to appease. No reason to stay quiet. That evening, back at the house, Charles slammed a whiskey glass against the kitchen sink. "Someone's stirring filth," he growled, pacing in his slippers. "Anonymous garbage." Maria Jensen's name came up. "We shut her up 10 years ago. Why now?" Evelyn tried to soothe him, voice low. "Don't overreact. Brandon's clean officially. No one has proof." He turned on her. "No one has proof yet. Do you think these things surface by accident?" Then he did what he always did when power slipped from his grip. He looked for someone to control. "Call her," he barked. "Tell Rachel to stop whatever she's started. Or Brandon isn't the only one whose future burns." But Rachel didn't take the call. Because while Charles seethed and Evelyn strategized, Rachel sat in her hospital room laptop open, watching a ripple of small chaos unfold. Maria had forwarded a message from the CPS director received. "Internal review initiated. Please preserve all physical records." Across town, Clara received an automated reply from the editor of the Borough Weekly, running in morning print. "Online tonight." And then came the real blow. A meeting scheduled for Monday, a preliminary committee session meant to confirm Brandon's nomination for a state internship, was suddenly canceled. The message to the invitees was vague, pending administrative concerns. Please await rescheduling. But everyone in that circle knew what pending concerns really meant. By midnight, the whispers were no longer just noise. They had shape, they had weight, and they had reach. I didn't sleep. Not because of pain, but because of the silence that followed. It wasn't peace, it was retreat. The kind of silence that comes before a storm you know you started. Around 3 a.m., the hallway light shifted. Evelyn stood in the doorway. She didn't knock. She didn't say hello. She walked to the side of my bed and gripped my wrist too tight to be maternal. Her perfume hit first roses over bleach. Her nails were perfect. Her smile was not. "I raised you better than this," she whispered. I stared up at her, unmoved. She leaned closer. You don't know what you're playing with, Rachel. You think this is justice. It's not. It's fire. And then softer. And you're about to burn us all. When the empire starts to shake its rulers, scramble to rewrite the rules. Rain tapped a cold rhythm against Elise Harper's bay windows, the kind of rain that felt like surveillance, watching, not falling. I sat curled in her reading chair, a heating pad across my lower back, when Clara entered holding a manila envelope. They didn't wait long, she muttered, handing it to me. The envelope bore a gold insignia, Blake Turner and Avery Attorneys at Law. My father's firm. My family's leash. Inside 3 pages dense legal language, but one message rang clear. Cease all communication with the press regarding unfounded allegations. Continued defamation may result in civil litigation and criminal complaints under local statutes. They're trying to muzzle you, Elise said softly, folding her arms. I ran a thumb over the embossed seal. Defamation. They think I'm scared of a lawsuit. They think you're still their daughter, Clara replied, which means obedient, manageable. That word boiled in my gut, manageable. How many years had I been trimmed down to fit their picture-perfect narrative? Every silence, every retreat was rewarded. Now that I spoke, they sent wolves in suits. I looked up. What happens if I ignore it? They'll escalate, Elise said flatly. File something, leak. Something, buy a narrative. Clara sat down beside me. If you don't tell your story, they'll write one for you. Her words stung. I'd spent the last decade making myself small to survive. Speaking up still felt like learning to walk on broken glass. But this wasn't survival anymore. It was war. Elise poured tea, steam curling upward like smoke. You need a channel. A real one. Someone willing to put their name beside yours. I hesitated, then remembered during college I once tutored a journalism student who now worked for the Civic Light, a small but fiercely independent outlet. Her name was Tara Min. We'd lost touch, but I still had her email. I wrote that night, fingers trembling more from adrenaline than pain. Subject story submission. Verified documentation attached body. Tara. You may not remember me, but I remember you said once, the truth scares people who need lies. Attached are files regarding Brandon Blake, son of former Senator Charles Blake. I'm ready to go on the record. Rachel Blake. The message hung in my outbox for a second, then vanished. I leaned back breathless. Outside, the storm built into something biblical. Around 10 p.m., while Elise graded student essays in the kitchen and Clara napped by the fireplace, my phone buzzed. A notification from civiclight.org. I opened the link. There I was, headshot from my university profile. Headline: Rachel Blake speaks out. A daughter's stand against silence. Below the first sentence. In an exclusive report, Rachel Blake, daughter of retired Senator Charles Blake, has come forward with allegations of long-suppressed abuse, systemic cover-ups, and the cost of silence within a powerful political family. No aliases, no softening. They named me. And I didn't feel fear. I felt seen. I felt loud. I felt like I had finally walked into my own story. They couldn't break my bones again, so they tried to break my name. It started with a headline, not the one I had approved, not the truth Tara had printed. This one came from Capital Current, a Blake-friendly station that hadn't mentioned me in a decade. Estranged daughter of Blake family battles mental health crisis, sources concerned. By sources they meant Charles and Evelyn, and God knows who else on their payroll. In the article, they quoted an anonymous family insider claiming I'd been unstable since college, that I was jealous of Brandon's political career, that I had once threatened to harm myself to gain attention. Every sentence twisted my breath tighter. At first I thought it would fade, but the smear campaign was just beginning. 2 days later, an invitation I had accepted to speak at a local youth panel was rescinded. The organizer left me a voicemail so drenched in false sympathy it burned. Given the media attention and potential liabilities, we're postponing. For now. That night, I walked into Bean and Cradle, the coffee shop where I'd met Tina during undergrad. She was sitting by the window, earbuds and typing on her laptop. I waved. Her eyes met mine. Then she looked away slowly, deliberately, and stood. Without a word, she packed her things and walked out, her Americano untouched. I stared at the door long after it shut. The rest of the cafe buzzed on a normal Thursday evening, but something inside me fell strangely still. Not from shock. From recognition. This was how erasure worked. Not with fanfare, but with absence. Friends don't attack you. They disappear. Institutions don't condemn you. They ignore your name on a list. The real exile is when you stay in your hometown and no one remembers you. Brandon appeared on a morning show the next day. He looked perfect, crisp collar, warm smile, the kind of charisma that hides rot under perfume. "We love Rachel," he said smoothly. "She's going through a lot, and we just want her to get help. You know, family should be about support, not blame." I wanted to scream, to reach into the screen and tear that lie from his lips. Instead, I turned off the TV and curled into myself, bones aching not from injury, but from invisibility. Even Maria had gone quiet. I knew she was working the case, but silence weighed heavy. Clara texted me hourly. Elise offered warm meals and soft words, but none of it kept the shadows from creeping in. That evening, Clara took me to the greenhouse behind her cottage. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary. We sat among potted basil and fading sunflowers, the only place where I still felt real. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I whispered. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside a dying plant and pressed her fingers into the soil. Gently, she turned it, checking its roots. "You know what happens when you try to put out a wildfire with silence?" I shook my head. "It finds oxygen anyway." She stood, brushed her hands clean, and placed one on my shoulder. Her grip was warm, grounded. "If you want your voice back, you'll need a fire big enough to burn down their silence. Silence can shield lies, but the truth, it sets wildfires." I adjusted the mic with trembling fingers. Across the table, Jenna gave me a slight nod, the kind of look that said, "You're safe here." But I wasn't sure. My hands were damp. My voice caught in my throat. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently. "Just what matters most to you." I took a breath deeper than I had in days. They say family protects you, but mine chose their name over my body. The words poured out like a flood held back for years. I told her about the fall in the living room, about Brandon's fury and the silent footsteps of my mother, about waking up in the hospital and hearing the word reputation before hearing, "Are you okay?" I told her about the box in the basement and the chill of Brandon's threat. I told her about the way Evelyn's voice turned brittle when she said, "This family needs you to know your place." I confessed the nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was the crazy one, if I'd made it all up. And then I told her about Dr. Harper, about Clara, about the tiny army I never expected to have. Jenna didn't flinch. She leaned in. "You've lived this. Now people will hear it." When the interview ended, I slumped back in my chair, lungs exhausted. I hadn't cried during the recording, but when Jenna stood to hug me, I let a tear fall. Not from pain, from release. The podcast dropped at 9:00 a.m. sharp. By noon, it had already cracked into the trending charts. By 5, Unspoken Lives posted a clip on social media, and my face pale, tired, but speaking was everywhere. I turned off my phone after reading 24 comments. Most were kind. Others, less so. "Elise." I murmured into the phone later that day. "Did I do the right thing?" "You did what they were afraid of," she said without hesitation. "You told the truth." She had already forwarded every medical report, time-stamped entry, and email trail to the review board. She had signed a formal statement verifying her observations from the day I arrived in the ER. I'm also preparing something for the state board, she added. Doctors are supposed to protect patients, not enable power games. That night, news broke on the Civic Lights homepage. Rachel Blake, daughter of former Mayor Charles Blake, breaks silence on abuse and corruption. No hiding now. No aliases. No whispers in the hallway. Just my name and my story on the page for the world to see. The next day, I sat alone in the kitchen of Clara's cottage watching snow gather along the edges of the window pane. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, but my stomach was tight. I hadn't seen Brandon in days. Evelyn had not responded to my messages. Charles, he'd gone to ground. Then my laptop pinged. An email. No subject. From City Reform Council. Due to recent public disclosures and corroborating evidence, Mr. Charles Blake has been asked to step down temporarily from his advisory position. We will be reviewing additional allegations in the coming weeks. My fingers trembled as I scrolled down. Another message followed. You are formally summoned to appear before the Preliminary Hearing Committee on Civic Ethics. You are invited to testify regarding internal misconduct, abuse, and coercion within the Blake family estate and associated public influence. At the bottom, a signature I didn't recognize. There is someone prepared to stand beside you. My chest tightened. I didn't know who. I didn't know how far this would go. But the silence had cracked. The fire had started. And now it was spreading. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the daughter of Charles Blake. I was a witness. The building was colder than I expected, high ceilings, gray walls, and rows of stiff-backed chairs that swallowed people in tension. My coat still clung to my shoulders, but I felt no warmth from it. Clara squeezed my hand before I stepped into the room. Elise had already taken her place in the back, arms folded, eyes watchful. The hearing room was fuller than I'd imagined. Reporters sat scattered behind the glass partition. Council members lined the curved dais, their expressions unreadable. The moderator, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp glasses, adjusted her mic. Rachel Blake, she said, please step forward. I did. My heels clicked on the floor like a countdown. My attorney nodded. You may speak freely. I took a breath. I'm not here to ruin reputations, I began. I'm here because the truth is the only thing I have left. They didn't interrupt. Not once. I recounted what happened that night, the argument, the fall, the sharp crack that felt like fire in my pelvis. I described Brandon's fury, my mother's silence, my father's concern for headlines over health. Each word came out quieter than the one before it, but steadier, more grounded. Then I placed the flash drive on the table. These are photos from that night. Time-stamped, unedited. You'll see the bruises, the angle of the fall, the injuries I sustained. I turned to Elise. Dr. Harper was the attending physician. Elise stood calm and composed. I confirmed the medical reports as valid and accurate. Rachel Blake's injuries were consistent with high-impact blunt trauma. Given her position on the floor when I arrived, and her inability to move independently, it is medically impossible that she caused the injury herself. Charles stood abruptly in the back, voice rising. This is a family matter. My daughter is emotionally compromised. We shouldn't be airing private dysfunction in a public space. The moderator raised her hand. Mr. Blake, please sit. You will have time to respond. Evelyn remained seated, her hands clenched in her lap like they could hold the world together by force. She didn't look at me. Not once. Maria Jensen, calm and efficient, submitted additional documentation. These are records of misfiled prescriptions under Brandon Blake's name. We believe controlled substances were being redirected. Charles exhaled sharply through his nose. Evelyn's spine straightened, but her lips never moved. Then Elise took out a slim folder. There's one more thing. She handed it to the moderator, who opened it carefully. This is a certified copy of Rachel Blake's radiograph taken the night of her admission. The injury pattern is consistent with a fall from standing height, specifically a downward shove or push. Given her bruising pattern and the witness's timeline, this was not an accident. I felt every eye on me, but it was Elise's voice that steadied me. I've known Rachel since she was a child. I watched her fight to be heard in a home that favored silence over healing. What happened to her is not just a tragedy. It's a symptom of something larger. The room went still. The moderator looked over her glasses. Is there anyone else who wishes to provide a statement or clarification before we recess? A chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. I turned slowly. From the far corner of the room, someone stood, hands trembling, jaw tight. He adjusted the collar of his shirt with twitchy fingers. Brandon. I do, he said, voice rough and uncertain. I have something to say. The lie cracked not from pressure outside, but from rot within. Brandon's voice didn't come out confident. It cracked mid-sentence like something inside him had already broken. He stood in front of the council, shifting from foot to foot, eyes darting, not looking at me, not looking at our parents. Just the floor. I didn't mean for things to get that far, he mumbled. But Rachel isn't lying. Gasps rippled through the room. Charles leaned forward, his knuckles white against the wood. Evelyn didn't move, but I saw the stiffening of her jaw, the way her chest rose with rapid breaths. Brandon swallowed hard. It wasn't... I didn't mean to push her that hard. He hesitated. I wasn't in my right mind. I'd been using... for a while. No one knew. They didn't want to know. He shot a glance toward Charles, and the air turned to glass. I kept asking for help. Brandon added. I did. But every time I slipped up, Dad just said to stay quiet. That people like us don't make mistakes, they have enemies. The silence in the room was suffocating. Charles erupted. You little coward. The entire panel jumped at the sound of his voice. You're blaming us now, he barked, rising to his feet. After everything we did to protect you, we paid for rehab, we covered for your messes. I used my connections to erase your damn records. A flurry of whispers erupted behind the glass. Phones were already up, recording, streaming, archiving the spectacle. Dad Brandon took a step back. No, don't dad me, Charles snarled. I spent years cleaning up your shit, keeping this family intact, and now, in front of strangers, you play the victim. Elise's hand slid to my arm. She whispered, They're broadcasting this. Every word. Charles slammed his palm on the desk. I covered for you, Brandon. I buried every damn incident, every overdose, every stolen prescription, and this is how you repay me. The room froze. The moderator's expression hardened. Mr. Blake, please be aware this session is being recorded and transmitted to the Public Oversight Office. But it was too late. He'd said it. On record. In front of the world. Brandon stood still, lips parted, breath shallow. You told me to stay quiet. You said it was the only way? No, Charles hissed. I told you to grow up. And look where we are now because you couldn't. The council recessed shortly after. Reporters flooded the building like vultures drawn to fresh wounds. I was ushered into a side corridor with Elise and Maria, while Clara held back the crowd. But I could still hear Charles shouting behind the doors. Outside, the sky was the color of ash. A reporter followed us to the sidewalk, microphone, outstretched eyes sharp beneath her hat. Rachel, she called. Given what just happened, do you have anything you'd like to say to the man who used to be your father? I didn't have to destroy them. They did it for me with every lie they told themselves. By the end of the week, the Blake name had become a cautionary tale. News anchors didn't even need dramatic inflection anymore. The truth carried its own weight. Headlines sprawled across every platform: former Mayor Charles Blake, under investigation for evidence suppression. Blake family legacy implodes amid abuse allegations. From power to silence, the rise and fall of Pennsylvania's first family. Charles was stripped of every ceremonial and honorary title he'd amassed in 3 decades. The Town Historical Committee issued a formal apology for prematurely memorializing a figure now subject to public scrutiny. City Hall removed his name from the council's marble donor wall within hours of the televised hearing. Even the local library home to the Charles E. Blake Study Hall issued a statement. We strive to reflect the values of accountability and safety. No one defended him. The Blake Civic Fund lost half its donors in 2 days. Community leaders resigned from the advisory board. Scholarships named after Brandon were suspended indefinitely. A leaked email from a university dean read, "We can no longer associate this institution with the Blake name in good conscience." I didn't celebrate. I just watched. Brandon, meanwhile, was ordered into a mandatory rehabilitation facility. The footage was grainy, probably taken from across the street, but it showed everything. He looked hollow. His clothes didn't fit right. His hands shook as he adjusted his hood. A single camera flash made him flinch like someone had hit him. He didn't answer a single question, just let himself be guided inside like someone walking into exile. They'll find a way to spin this, Clara muttered, pouring herself a glass of wine as we sat in her den. They'll try anyway. But it won't stick this time. Because it's not just them talking now, I said. It's everyone else. Elise's interview aired the next day. Calm, factual, and damning. She outlined the injury reports, the Blake family's behavior that night, and the systemic pressure to stay silent. There comes a point, she said into the camera, when being quiet makes you complicit. The comment section filled faster than anyone expected. Thousands of shares, hundreds of people writing "Me too," or "This reminds me of my sister," or "We need more people like Rachel and Elise." For the first time, the narrative wasn't theirs to control. And Evelyn. She vanished. The media called it self-imposed seclusion. What it really was, hiding. No statements, no press conference, no effort to salvage face. The curtains in their mansion stayed closed. The security lights flickered without pattern. Neighbors whispered that grocery deliveries sat untouched at the gate. Not a word from her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Evelyn used to tell me that silence was strength, that dignity came from not engaging. But silence now meant guilt. It meant the game was over, and she had nothing left to say. Friday afternoon, I returned to the house not to confront, not to demand, but to leave something behind. I stood outside the front door, wind tugging at my coat sleeves. The stone pathway was lined with fading autumn leaves, the porch immaculate as always. The same brass lion knocker stared back at me. Same door, same wreath, same legacy that never fit. I reached into my pocket and took out the ring. Heavy gold. Family crest. Evelyn had slipped it onto my hand the day of Brandon's high school graduation. "You'll understand one day," she'd said. "You wear this not because you want to, but because you must." I laid it gently on the doormat. No note. No words. Just the ring and everything it stood for finally out of my hands. I turned and walked back to the car where Clara waited. She didn't speak. Just started the engine, the soft hum breaking the silence like a whisper in church. As we pulled away, I kept my gaze forward, not looking back. Clara glanced over. Her voice was low, knowing. "Kanja song chua." I didn't hesitate. "Not yet," I said. "Now it's time for the others they left behind. After fire, there's ash." But ash is fertile, and I was ready to grow something real. The building was old, but we had scrubbed it clean. The paint was chipped in places, the floors creaked with every step, and the heater moaned through the vents like an old ghost refusing to leave. But it was ours. A banner above the door read, "Silent No More, S 2024. The letters were hand-painted, bold and imperfect like the people inside. We hadn't advertised much. A few online posts, word of mouth, an article buried beneath local headlines. Yet when I pulled open the front door that morning, there were already a dozen people inside, some sitting in folding chairs, some hovering near the coffee table, some just pacing with their arms crossed. Survivors didn't always walk in with confidence. They entered slowly, cautiously, like people testing a floor they feared might collapse. I stood near the back window, the chill of winter air clinging to the glass. Elise walked by me with a clipboard, her presence quiet but grounded. She had taken the title of honorary medical director, but everyone here already knew she was more than that. She was the one who stayed when no one else did. Clara was in the front office speaking with a volunteer about accounting software we barely knew how to use. This wasn't an institution. It was a beginning. When it came time to speak, I moved to the small podium we borrowed from the rec center. My palms were damp. Not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. I used to think silence was the safest choice. I began. That if I just stayed quiet long enough, eventually the world would move on and forget what happened. But pain doesn't disappear when it's buried. It grows in the dark. And silence doesn't protect victims. It protects abusers. I scanned the faces in front of me. Some looked at me directly. Some looked at the floor. Some clutched tissues or sat perfectly still. But they were all listening. "We're not here to relive what broke us," I continued. "We're here to rebuild. And I want you to know, starting today, you don't have to do it alone." After I finished, there was no applause, just stillness. And that felt more honest. People began to talk. The chairs moved. Conversations bloomed like cautious flowers in frost. I poured coffee, restocked tissues, answered questions I didn't know I was ready for. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt like I was shaping something. Near the back door, I noticed her. A young woman no older than 20 hovered at the edge of the room. Her coat was zipped to her throat, her arms wrapped tightly around her body like armor. She held a crumpled flyer in her hand, the kind we had passed out at coffee shops and libraries. Her eyes never settled, darting between faces and exits. I walked toward her slowly, offering a small smile. "Hi, I'm Rachel. You don't have to say anything. You can just sit." She didn't answer right away. Then her voice barely above a whisper. "My boyfriend says I make everything up. He says I ruin things just to get attention." I nodded. Not in agreement, but in understanding. She took one step closer, then another. And before either of us realized what was happening, she was in my arms, shaking silently. "I believe you," I whispered. "Starting today, no one is silent alone anymore." She broke. Right there. And in holding her, I didn't feel like the broken one anymore. Across the room, Elise wiped her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. Clara approached and slipped her hand around mine. "You've become exactly who you needed back then," she said. "And now you're becoming that for others." I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. My throat was too full of gratitude. As we closed up later that afternoon, the snow had started to fall. The windows frosted slightly the quiet outside, a contrast to the warmth that lingered within. Near the door, I noticed a thick white envelope slip through the mail slot. There was no return address, just my name in neat cursive. Inside was a typed letter: "Dear Ms. Blake, I live in Ridgeview, 2 counties over. We've followed your story closely and believe it could help many others. Would you consider sharing it on national television? We'd be honored to host you. No threats, no agenda, just an invitation." I stared at the page for a long moment, fingers trembling slightly. The fire hadn't died. It had spread, and it was starting to light the way. They told me to be quiet. Instead, I built a microphone out of everything they tried to silence me with. The State Hall was dressed in its best polished brass railings, velvet-lined seats, and flags positioned with military precision. Overhead, chandeliers sparkled like constellations, illuminating the hundreds gathered below. Cameramen adjusted tripods. Reporters whispered rehearsed questions to themselves. Tonight wasn't about ceremony, it was about a reckoning. Backstage, I stared into the mirror one last time. My reflection held firm. No tremble in my fingers. No hesitation in my breath. Clara stood at my shoulder, adjusting the lapel of my dark blazer. "You don't owe them anything," she murmured, "but they need to hear it." Elise nodded from the corner, her eyes shining with pride. "You're not just surviving anymore, Rachel. You're leading." My name echoed from the speakers. I stepped forward. The applause that greeted me wasn't thunderous, but it was grounded, authentic. As I walked across the stage, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, Elise seated front row, hands clasped over her chest. Maria flanked by two CPS colleagues. Several survivors from the center, some holding tissues, others holding hands. And in the back, barely visible behind a pillar, Brandon. Alone. Watching. I reached the podium. My palms rested flat against its surface. I looked down at my prepared notes, then folded them and placed them aside. "I never imagined standing here," I said, voice steady. "Not because I doubted my strength, but because I doubted anyone would care enough to listen." A quiet settled over the hall. For years I was told that silence was strength, that to keep the peace I needed to bite my tongue, smile for the camera, and never speak of what hurt. But peace built on silence is fragile. It cracks. And when it shatters, it cuts the ones it was meant to protect. I paused, eyes sweeping across the crowd. I am not here today as a victim. I am not even here solely as a survivor. I'm here as a builder of truth, of community, of something no one could hand me a voice. I shared the outline of my journey, not the scars, but the power earned in their healing. I spoke of betrayal, yes, but also of the fire that rose from it. I spoke of silent no more, of the women and men who walked in trembling and left standing tall. Of Elise who stood when others looked away. Of Clara who handed me a key when the world gave me walls. The hall was breathless. I've learned that forgiveness is not a favor to those who harmed us. It is a freedom we give ourselves. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It honors the pain and frees us from carrying it like chains. A murmur passed through the audience, recognition, agreement, perhaps tears. I looked out over them and said the words I had waited a lifetime to speak. To anyone who's ever been told to sit down, shut up, and be grateful you don't have to, your voice matters. Start speaking. We'll hear you. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Then one clap, another. Then a swell of applause, not mechanical, not polite, but thunderous, rising to its feet, echoing off the high-arched ceiling. I descended the stage into a sea of embraces. People I barely knew squeezed my hands. Some whispered thank you. Some simply wept. Behind the crowd, Brandon rose from his seat. He didn't wave, didn't approach. Just stood for a moment, then quietly slipped out the side door, unnoticed by most except me. Backstage, Elise waited, smiling with red-rimmed eyes. Clara wrapped an arm around my waist and guided me down the corridor. Outside, the winter air cut through my coat, crisp and cold, but I barely felt it. "I think this is only the beginning," Elise said, her voice low, her smile unshakable. And in that moment, I knew she was right. They tried to silence me, to bury me under shame and lies. But I stood, and in standing, I shattered the illusion that had protected them for so long. Justice didn't come swiftly, but it came because I refused to look away even when everyone else did. Like a wound that heals stronger at the scar, the truth made me whole again. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved, you leave a 1 in the comments. If something felt missing, leave a 2, and tell us why. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support stories that give voice to the unheard.